Timothy Patitsas has been the interim dean of Hellenic College since January 2020 and the assistant professor of ethics at Holy Cross, Greek Orthodox School of Theology, since the fall of 2005. From 2006 until 21, he has held the main responsibility for the St. Helens Pilgrimage, which is the annual study abroad program for MDiv seniors in Greece, Constantinople, Mount Athos, Israel, and Palestine. In 2019, he published The Ethics of Beauty, an attempt to recover one of the most ancient emphases of Orthodox spirituality, which is the firm priority given to combating the sexual rather than the intellectual passions. The book shows how this translates into a consoling and liberating beauty-first approach to Orthodox ethics and life. The work also presents ethical, theological, and scriptural definitions of traumatic experience with a view to aiding recovery. His PhD dissertation, The King Returns to His City, an Interpretation of Great Week and the Bright Week Cycle of the Orthodox Church, combined interest in organic order, liturgy, and the economic and political writings of Jane Jacobs, whom Dr. Patitsas has the great joy of knowing personally. His current research centers on themes including liturgy and its relationship to moral agency, synodality and rhetoric as blood work, and macroeconomic theory in the light of new definitions of economic development. Professor Patitsas serves on the boards of the Russian Orphan Opportunity Fund, the Patristic Institute, and the co-founder of Beauty First Films, and the co-designer of its annual liturgical seasons calendar. So, one thing I can tell you is that I was a student at Holy Cross back in a long time ago, 1988, for one semester, and so it's a place that I hold dear to my heart. So,
thank you so much, Your Eminence. Thank you for those kind words and that nice introduction. Yes, my name is Timothy Patitsas. I think it's being filmed too, but we'll look out here at the world. Yeah, I've been the Dean of Hellenic College the last 4 years, so we're always looking for more students. It's an Orthodox Christian undergraduate college, as well as being the first 4 years of the seminary. And I think it's a good place to send, especially if you know a young person that really has a heart for the church and wants to get closer to the church as they pursue their undergraduate degree. It's a good place to study. We have majors in things like history and literature and psychology, classics. We're trying to phase out our business management degree in favor of a degree in nonprofit management and international service. So that's kind of a nod to my past, having gone to the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. I had a different life planned for myself. As a kid, I thought somehow that my future was in the military, and that didn't happen. I had a collapsed lung in high school, and that was knocked out for me. I've looked up his name, but I always forget it. There's a story from classical Greece of the Spartans went to Delphi, and they got some kind of an oracle that said a great military leader, has arisen for you, but you've got to go to the Athenians, and they will give you this. It's a newborn child, and he will be. And the Athenians, being a smart Alex, to the Spartans, they purposely chose a child who had been born completely lame, and they gave this child to the Spartans. And the Spartans respected the oracle, though. There's nothing they could do about it. But this child grew up to be a great poet and a songwriter, and he wrote the songs and poems that carried the Spartan army to victory after victory. I don't remember the name, but I remember learning that story as a kid and thinking that somehow my life would reflect that. I didn't know how, but it is an interesting thing that not having served in any way, that thank God that many people who have enjoyed the book and found it helpful. The Ethics of Beauty book, I mean. What else can I really say about myself? I guess I would just also add that this little film company that my close friend Tamaida and I, she lives in Portland and I live on the West Coast and I live on the East Coast. We just completed our first film from our little film company, and it's called Amphilochios, Saints of Patmos. So that's sort of making the film festival circuit now, and from there, we'll see how we find to distribute it. And it's through Tamaida that I know Kelly, and Kelly's the person who told me I had to come, and that's why I'm here.
I dragged you here.
So yeah, so we hope that's an interesting story because St. Amphilochios was born in like 1888, 1889 type of time frame. Like many people in Greece, I don't know, maybe in many parts of the world, his father actually emigrated to the United States, and he worked in the Pacific Northwest for 10, 12 years, wasn't really making it, and went back to Greece with whatever money he had, got married to a girl from Patmos, and he was from an island called Lypso, which is a teeny tiny little island, just off the coast of Patmos, and raised his son there. He was very close to Christ, the saint's father, and his son was born to be a monk, and just one of those people that from a young age saw visions of the Virgin Mary, and St. John, a theologian, who's very beloved on the island, as you can imagine, since that's where the apocalypse was received. And St. Amphilochios later then became a spiritual father to Kallistos Ware, and Kallistos Ware became a monk in Patmos at that monastery. And so did St. Gavrila, the ascetic of love. She also was a spiritual daughter of St. Amphilochios, and he had an impact. And it's just nice in general, to reflect on whatever is beautiful and whatever is lovely and whatever is inspiring. And when we, read things like Lives of Saints, we find a kind of effortless progress in our spiritual lives, because the beauty of their stories, touches us so gently, and dissolves the barriers and defenses we have against the spiritual life, and helps us to really aspire to be like them, and to start to feel like no matter the price that we have to pay, it wouldn't be that much. And that's why part of what the church does is just every day of the year holding saints to our, for our admiration, and we read about them and their lives, and we sing about them and their successes and their struggles and their trials and their sufferings. And by that relentless focus on the beautiful, the church lifts us up and calls us into being. And I remember I worked daycare after I finished Georgetown. I took a pilgrimage to meet Saint Sophrony Sakharov, and I spent a month with him. And when I came back, I was living in my parents' house again, and kind of wondering what my next steps were. And I remember there was a little boy at the daycare where I worked, and I loved him very much. He really had like a fiery spirit, but anyone could upset him. Anyone could just say something to him, and he would just, and then he'd get so upset he was just in a mess. And everyone knew that. The other little boys knew that, and then they took advantage of that during football games and baseball games, and just to learn in life that I don't have to respond to every provocation. I don't have to I don't need to have an opinion on everything that's happening in the world. I do not know what the right solution is between Israel and Palestine. I just do not. And if I thought about it really hard and became an area specialist, I still would not know. And I know other people may know, and I respect them for that, and I certainly pray. I'm not saying there is no answer, that no one knows. I'm just saying that that's not what I've been asked to do, to speak authoritatively on that. And in many other situations in the world, every time I see something crazy on Twitter or something, no one's asking me to respond to that. No one is telling me I've got to correct that person. What I do have to do, I feel, is give my life much more completely to the memory and the preservation of the memory of all the beautiful things that human beings have accomplished in this world. And whether that be in art or music or literature, in theology, in lives well lived. I mean, if you just stop and think about all there is to admire in the people around you, all the suffering that people have endured nobly, there isn't almost any time for anything else. But we do have to do that work so that we go deeper, so that the people around us also get caught up in this journey. And eventually, I don't know if it's really an old Native American proverb about, the two wolves, and, one is, doing this bad things and one is bad. And then the boy says to the elder, and which one will win? Whichever one you feed. If you feed the negativity, that will win. And if you feed the positivity. And some things just have to be starved, and just not necessarily canceled, but you only have one life. You're a limited person. You're not living here forever. So with the days that you have to pursue first a love for the beautiful, and then you have to go on to do the good works that are implied in that with all your heart. And you will be transformed, and other people who pursue this path will be transformed. And then in the not too distant future, you will, hang up your saddle. You will, hang up your spurs. You will be done. And and that's, and in the meantime, though, you will really have built more and more. Now, bishops have a different role. They have to keep an eye, and they have to discipline. Sometimes as parents, we have to discipline. But no one's asking me to discipline the random person on Twitter or Facebook. Occasionally, if I do see a person kind of getting out of hand and acting in a berserk way on Facebook or Twitter, I will DM them and say, let's talk, or here's my number. Normally that doesn't lead to anything, but there's a possibility at times. But for the most part, I don't have to engage in that, public attack on that person, whatever. There is plenty to be done. Like I said, that's not everyone's role. Some people do have to keep an eye on suppressing the bad, and that's a different calling. And when you have that calling, then the grace is given to meet it. If your calling is to be, let's say, an analyst for the government looking out on the horizon for bad things, then with that comes the grace to do that well. And there it is. But if that's not your calling, if your calling is other things, or it's proportional to the extent that that's your calling, the grace will be given and not more. So The Ethics of Beauty was a book that I wrote, and I've been asked to summarize it and then take questions, and I think that's a good plan. Every time I summarize The Ethics of Beauty, I say something much different about it, which drives my publisher crazy. They think this is really bad for sales. And they're going to hear this now because this is recorded, and I will hear it. There will be a phone call. There will be a painful email. You need to stick to the script. In a sense, what the book is about is, an ancient way of knowing. It's about knowledge. It's about an approach to knowing that uses your whole personhood and the purification of your whole personhood, and has the possibility of arriving at truth in a much more sure way, in a way that doesn't excite your passions or your ego, in a way that is much more conciliar and synodal. And that's a big part of what the book is about. Of course, related to that is that it's a book about Jesus Christ and Him crucified, because St. Paul said, I resolve to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. So somehow Christ crucified and resurrected is the principle for us, the key to all knowledge. Somehow that is the key that we have to master if we're going to know anything for sure. And I think the book, tries to, explain in different ways, because, what it means to know things, the responsibility, the cross that's implied there. And we have to have, faith. And of course, also the book is about trauma especially in the earlier chapters. And the kind of knowledge that is vouchsafed to us, let's say, when we are, when somehow it is given to us, or somehow it happens that we suffer in a much more overwhelming way, whether in a single incident or in a sort of low-grade way over time. The way, in a sense, that can give us access to, it is an intimacy with Christ there, potentially, because they certainly tried to traumatize him. They certainly, as we know, beat him to within an inch of his life, and then they crucified him. And so when we suffer, there is a sense in which we are coming very close to Christ. But of course, trauma, because we are not only sinful, but we're also weak. We're just human. And so some things can happen that overwhelm us, and then what we think we know and what we seem to know is not exactly the truth of things. And this is where trauma becomes dangerous, because we want to make sure that we're operating in this world more or less, with a realistic sense of that world that's out there. Before I take questions, I want to finish with a story. I asked the great Olga Mirsin, who is the wife of Father Michael Mirsin, and also a professor of Russian literature at Georgetown. I asked her once how it was that she, as a Jew born in the former Soviet Union at a young age, 17 or so, emigrated to Israel, and how is it that there, as a Jew, free in an Israeli country, instead became an Orthodox Christian. And she said something that will stick with me for the rest of my life. She said, if you are a Jew, maybe you can understand why it is that God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Maybe you can understand it, but you can never really forgive him. And it's just so painful to think that the promise, the longed for thing, the son that was conceived after the visit of the three angels, that God should then say, sacrifice him. She says, but then I was in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on a Holy Saturday, and one of the, I think it's 14 prophecy readings that we read is exactly this story. And she said, if you accept that Christ is the Son of God, then and only then does that story make sense. Is it possible to believe that a loving God asked Abraham to do that? And then you see that it was this tremendous, as Christ said, I no longer call you disciples, I call you friends. A tremendous moment of friendship between Abraham and God the Father, and seeing what he would go through in giving his son on the cross for us. You may know that by tradition, the spot where this happened is under the Dome of the Rock, I think, or it's in the Muslim section of the Temple Mount there. And by tradition, when Abraham was stayed by the angel, his hand was blocked by the angel, and he looked over and saw the ram ready, that was on another of the hills in Jerusalem, and that hill became Golgotha. And that's the tradition of it. So it's fulfilled there for us. And so I think life is certainly a great mystery, and luckily it doesn't last forever, because as Saint Patitsas said, if I focus too much on all the suffering in this world, all the people that come to me, a loved one is suffering a mental illness, cancer, divorce, all the great suffering in this world, he said, if I did not know that Christ will have the last word, he said, I would break. And that is, that is the destiny of our father confessors. They are the compost pile of the human race, and they get to hear all that again and again, week after week, day after day, year after year, and through faith and through the grace of ordination, turn it into this fertilized and beautiful earth wherein the church can grow again through their counsel.
I resonate with like most of what you say in the book and everything that you're saying here, and so glad that you made it mean so much that you're here. I think the thing that I sort of trip on is like, I agree with everything you say like toward beauty. What I trip on is the contrast with truth. And so I'm like really like, I mean, the way you're heading on now is like probably you understand my suspicion of that.
Yeah, sure.
Like
Keep going.
why the contrast from truth, and what does that mean, and isn't truth beautiful? And are we separating it, and and how would you kind of respond to that? Because I think you get what I mean.
No, I totally do. So, so in a sense, the book is a rhetorical act, right? You're saying things to try to sharpen the distinction so people can catch on to something new. In the last chapter of the book, we turn this question to the question of science, and a name that no one I know knows, and I only know it because of Jane Jacobs, but Warren Weaver, who somehow played a pivotal role in the history of modern science. And he was controlled the research money for the Rockefeller Institute. And after 25 years in that role, in 1957, he stepped down and he wrote this valedictory. And he said, there's something I've got to say, which is, in the history of science, we have three kinds of scientific problems that we're capable of handling. And the last one, we've really only had for 25 years. And that's the so-called problem in organic complexity or organized complexity, also called problems in emergent order, also called, importantly, the science of living systems. So another name for it is biology. So we certainly don't want to lose that one. And then what Jane Jacobs says in The Death and Life of Great American Cities is she says, look, my funding came from the Rockefeller Institute, so I happen to see this valedictory address by Warren Weaver, and guess what? That's what I've been trying to do in my book about cities, to describe them according to this new kind of science. And that's radical because in the new kind of science, she said, and she was not a believer, it turns out in the new kind of science that if you don't love something, you cannot understand it. And it's a kind of crazy statement, and even I don't quite believe it. But anyway, I believe Jane Jacobs, so I'll take it on faith. And then she said all the people who wrote about cities and openly admitted they hated cities, their prescriptions amounted to the sack of our cities. And the people who love cities have something intelligent to say about them, because this kind of order, you've got to love it. And one of the joys in my life at Hellenic College, we teach a course called Theories and Methods for the Study of Religion. And then we just group, the theories from Karl Marx, these modern theories, according to which of the three kinds of science they were operating with. And then we get to tell students sort of this new kind of science, these are all the tricks for advancing your knowledge in that kind of an area. You need a mentor, you need time, you need to befriend the situation, you need to somehow let it know you back in some weird way. So really, at the conclusion of the book, I say we need all three kinds of science, but for living systems, we have to prefer this beauty first way, and we have to be suspicious of these other types. The other types of science also, it's easier to wield them in an egotistical way. And it takes, you really can't do that with the study of living systems. The humility is built in. And that humility is beautiful because it's an invitation to community. So ultimately when we say beauty first, what we're saying is our capacity, our aesthetic sense is a cognitive sense. So it is a way of knowing truth. And it's the way of knowing truth that we too easily ignore. And people too easily shame us out of it. And then we're kind of defenseless because we give it up too easily. Kelly and I were on this grand tour with 30 other people with Andrew Gold, and we went to these churches of Serbia, all these places. And I was reminded there of something that Christian Stavrola Conrad introduced in my life, the work of Christopher Alexander. And he is encouraging people in a beauty first way to ask yourself questions like, between these two buildings, which one has more life? And that's really an aesthetic answer that you give. And he's saying, but 90% of people, if they ask that question, will come to the same conclusion. And that aesthetic sense has to be relied upon. And he says something else. I don't know if it's in The Nature of Order, which like Kristen Stavrola edited or something. I can't remember what they did to that book. That's a historic book. He shows you pictures of two salt shakers, and he says, which of these salt shakers is a more accurate picture of your soul? Well, that's a crazy question. Except you look at the salt shakers and you know it's this one. Everyone knows it's the one on the right. So what is that? What is that ability to know that we have that we were never taught in school? We were taught to suppress in school. And when I was in Serbia and Kosovo and all these places, I didn't know we were going to Kosovo, by the way, until we got to the border. I'm like, what? I was so busy at work I didn't look at the itinerary. I'm like, do I really want to do this? But anyway, it was fine. If you ask yourself, what makes a beautiful church? It's the church that's an accurate picture of your soul. That question doesn't make any sense in a kind of linear way. If you tried to work it out, you would go into some weird Kabbalah thing of this stands for that part of the soul. It's nothing like that. But you come into an Orthodox church and you say, okay, this somehow is my soul belongs here because this is like my soul. And all the ancients thought that way. That they thought that there was some cosmic thing, there was some worldly thing, and there was some inner thing, and they were the same shape. They knew that, and we have tried as hard as we can to forget it. So again, I didn't hit 21 on that either, but I'm stopping. Okay. I'm not going to look at you in case you're disappointed with the answer. Okay, all right. The shame. See, that's a healthy shame coming. Yes, Jim.
Picking up on that, most people would simply say that's culturally determined. The different people would react differently to the different salt shakers depending on what society they were brought up in, et cetera, et cetera. But are you positing there's something inherent in the human condition that is universal and is not culturally?
Yes. Just like we all have capacity for reason, we all have capacity for aesthetic intelligences too, yeah.
And that would be the same for all humans, despite cultural influences?
With some education, right? Or some, guidance, because it's a living system. I'm going to need a mentor. Yeah, I'll be able to see it in any culture, and it'll look different in each culture, but it's the same thing. It's the same shape of oh, yeah, there it is. There is that sort of at-homeness of the soul that that we experience, and it's universal.
Well, wouldn't that mean though that if that's a universal component of humanity, but there are cultural variations that some are close, some cultures are closer to that universal truth and some are maybe farther away? Okay,
so first of all, in general, the aesthetic sense, our capacity for beauty in the church is thought, in order to be refined, we need to live an ascetic life. So asceticism refines that. So even in your own life, your capacity can wax and wane. So it's not so obvious. There is something. In terms of cultures, I would just say every culture that we consider great was obsessed with some other culture that it thought was greater. I can't really think of a great culture now. Now, in ancient China, that other culture that was greater was posited on some heavenly plane, but they were obsessed with it. And I think that's all I would want to say about that, just that the great cultures all sort of lived in repentance. They all sort of felt like, I have a version of this in the modern age. It's sort of a dark, traumatic version, which is when I was a kid in the 1970s, we would think we're Christians, but not like the people behind the Iron Curtain. Like, that's a real Christian, man. They had it, and they were persecuted. And time passed, and I was in Russia a lot, and I'd hear people say, yeah, we were Christians then, but not like the people who went to the Gulag. Those were real Christians. But in Romania and the Gulag, they said, oh, we were Christians, but not like the people who went to Pitești. Pitești was the lowest circle of hell. And there was that sense. So there's something inherent in Orthodoxy that you have that sense always that there's something else beyond, I will never, Saint Silouan said, I have never equaled my father's faith. I've never. And so a part of repentance and that growth of the ascetic spirit and the aesthetic spirit is more and more that vivid sense. You look at maybe an earlier generation or another people, and you think, I will never equal them. Yeah. I remember as a young man, I think I had finished college, and there used to be a show called World Monitor, which was a production of Christian Science Monitor people. And unlike every other news show at that time, they never dubbed a foreign language speaker. It was always subtitle. And so you could hear people, like, their language. Because the old way was, they say one syllable and then, some wooden stilted thing comes over. And it kind of makes all foreign language speakers seem kind of dumb. Like, they can't even speak their own language. Guys got to... And it was during some kind of crisis in Ethiopia, not, the main one, but that one came later. And I heard a penniless woman speaking Amharic. Is that how you say Amharic? For the first time. And I thought, oh my God, I will never equal those people. That is a royal race, top to bottom. And those kind of feelings, I don't know if they're objectively true, but they're more than objectively true. They're honest truth, and they save your soul to have some sense that there's other people out there who's beyond me, and it's just very important to have that feeling. Yeah. Every great person does. If you talk to athletes too, if you like to talk to like Tom Brady or whatever, he has a sense, other players were something else, another era, and it did something more. There's no excellent person that doesn't have that drive, yeah. There's a book called Athonite Fathers and Athonite Matters. It was written by St. Patitsas, and some people say, one of the greatest saints of our era. And that's a great book because he's talking about the older generation of ascetics. And no, those guys were real monks. and whenever you come across someone saying that, good things are going to happen. Just that relentless drive to give praise. And that's heaven. I mean, it's we're going to grow from glory to glory. I mean, if I make it. Okay, is it 8:30 yet, Kelly?
Want to get off the hook?
So I have one quick question.
Sure.
When is the movie going to come out so that we can see it?
So it turns out when you make movies, the first thing you do is you go through film festivals, partly because you're hoping to make get help with distribution. So you can't release the film widely until you're done with that. But at Bizan Fest, which is the big Orthodox film festival in Sydney, Australia, 2 weeks ago, the film that won was called Sacred Alaska. And that film is 80 minutes long. Ours is 30. So we're working out an arrangement with them, and we're hoping that parishes, monasteries, groups will, write to us and, try to get, just get both films and show it in your local theater. Because, we shot the film and, for showing in a theater, and plus it has subtitles too, and that can be annoying if you have 20 people looking at a small TV, you can't see what's being said. So we're hoping that people will go to beautyfirstfilms.com, maybe subscribe to our email list, and as we begin to announce the details of distribution, it'll be ready. And we're just very pleased that we were lucky enough to make a movie. I mean, the whole thing was pretty unlikely. Well, not if you know Tom Aida, it's not unlikely, but I didn't know Tom Aida before we started. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much for coming. We'll keep up the good work at Holy Cross.
Yes, come to Holy Cross or any of the other seminaries. Young men especially.